In a dramatic series of public statements that have sent ripples through the international diplomatic community, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has simultaneously dangled the prospect of a presidential summit to end the war in Ukraine while forcefully accusing Ukrainian and European leaders of actively sabotaging peace efforts. Lavrov, in a carefully worded interview, indicated that President Vladimir Putin is prepared to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, a development long sought by Kyiv and encouraged by the United States under President Donald Trump. However, this apparent opening was immediately qualified with significant preconditions, effectively placing the onus for any diplomatic failure squarely on Ukraine and its Western partners. Lavrov stated that Putin is ready for a meeting, but only when a substantive agenda is fully prepared and ready for final agreement. This assertion was coupled with the claim that the agenda is currently not ready at all, a clear signal that Moscow believes significant concessions must be made by Kyiv before any such high-level engagement can occur. This diplomatic maneuvering comes as President Trump's administration has intensified its push for a negotiated settlement, having recently hosted talks with both Russian and Ukrainian representatives. Expanding on Moscow's visions for a post-conflict settlement, Lavrov outlined a framework that revives and clarifies long-standing Russian demands. At the forefront of these conditions is the unequivocal insistence that Ukraine must renounce any ambition to join the NATO military alliance. This has been a cornerstone of Russian foreign policy and a key justification for its military action. Lavrov made it clear that Ukraine's membership in NATO remains a red line for Russia. Beyond neutrality, Russia is demanding comprehensive security guarantees for Ukraine, but on Moscow's terms. Lavrov proposed that these guarantees should be provided by a group of major powers, specifically including the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia itself. He also suggested that other nations like Germany and Turkey could be included as guarantors. Under this proposal, the guarantors would ensure the security of a Ukraine that is neutral, non-aligned with any military bloc, and non-nuclear. This framework deliberately positioned Russia as a central arbiter of Ukraine's future security, a condition that Kyiv and its allies are likely to view with deep suspicion. The proposal notably echoes elements from the failed Istanbul discussions of 2022, which Lavrov explicitly referenced, suggesting Moscow's desire to return to a negotiating framework that predates some of Ukraine's most significant battlefield successes. The diplomatic overture was paired with a sharp and sustained critique of Ukrainian and European leadership. Lavrov directly accused Zelensky and his European counterparts of not wanting peace, claiming their actions and rhetoric following recent diplomatic engagement in Washington indicates a preference for a military solution framed in terms of win and defeat. He contrasted these alleged intransitions with the positions of President Trump and President Putin, whom he claimed both genuinely desire peace. In a particularly pointed attack, Lavrov questioned President Zelensky's very legitimacy to sign any binding peace agreement, citing the postponement of elections under martial law. He stated that while Russia views Zelensky as the de facto head of the regime, Moscow would need a very clear understanding that any signatory to a final document is legitimate, a statement that introduced a significant potential roadblock to any future treaty. These accusations serve to create a narrative in which Russia is the party pursuing a reasonable peace, only to be thwarted by an obstinate Kyiv and its hawkish Western backers. Lavrov claimed that during recent talks, Zelensky rejected key principles presented to him, including discussions on NATO membership and territorial issues. This portrayal of events paints a picture of a diplomatic impasse caused entirely by Ukrainian refusal to engage with Russia's core concerns. The response from the United States has been one of cautious engagement mixed with pronounced skepticism. Secretary of State Marco Rubio who has been central to the Trump administration's diplomatic efforts, has stated that while the ultimate goal is a negotiated settlement, there has been no significant progress in recent talks with Russian officials. Rubio has emphasized that while President Trump is eager to see an end to the fighting, the U.S. has not seen a sincere interest from the Russian side in achieving that objective. He has acknowledged that a durable peace that protects Ukrainian sovereignty is the desired outcome, but has also noted that we have a long ways to go before serious peace talk can commence. The administration is navigating a complex path, trying to leverage the threat of further sanctions and tariffs to pressure Moscow, while simultaneously keeping the door open for diplomacy. President Trump has expressed frustration at the disconnect between conciliatory phone calls and the continued violence on the ground. Vice President J.D. Vance, however, has struck a more optimistic tone, suggesting that Russia has made significant concessions for the first time in the conflict, including acknowledging that there will be some form of security guarantee for Ukraine's territorial integrity. This divergence in tone may reflect a multifaceted strategy of applying both pressure and encouragement to bring the party to the table. The broader international context for these diplomatic exchanges is one of deep-seated mistrust. European leaders, while publicly supporting President Trump's efforts, are largely skeptical of Putin's sincerity. The prevailing strategy among many European allies appears to be one of humoring the diplomatic process to call Russia's bluff, believing that Putin's ultimate goal remains the capitulation of Ukraine, not a negotiated peace. They see the talks as an opportunity to demonstrate to the world and perhaps to President Trump himself that Moscow is the primary obstacle to peace, thereby strengthening the case for continued pressure and sanctions. This perspective is reinforced by Russia's continued military action, including large-scale missile and drone attacks that have struck civilian and industrial targets across Ukraine. Even as peace overtures are being made, Ukrainian officials have voiced their own frustrations, accusing Russia of trying to wriggle out of a genuine summit and engaging in talks in bad faith. For Kyiv, the concept of security guarantees is paramount. Having seen the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, under which it gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurance that ultimately failed to prevent invasion, Ukraine is demanding far more robust and concrete commitment this time. The Ukrainian position is that any ceasefire or settlement must not simply be a pause for Russia to rearm and attack again. It must be underpinned by ironclad, legally binding guarantees from its allies. The details of Russia's proposed peace terms reveal the vast gulf that remains between the two sides. Beyond the core demands of neutrality and specific security guarantors, Lavrov reiterated that there were still territorial discussions to be had and that the protection of Russian speakers in Ukraine remains a key issue. This alludes to Russia's maximalist demands, which are understood to include the formal ceding of all Ukrainian territory currently occupied by Russia, as well as regions it claims but does not fully control. These are conditions that President Zelensky has repeatedly and publicly rejected. The Russian framework essentially demands that Ukraine accepts a diminished sovereignty, with its foreign and security policy subject to the approval of a Council of Great Powers where Russia holds a veto. It also insists on territorial dismemberment, a price that is politically impossible for any Ukrainian leader to pay. The insistence on returning to the 2022 Istanbul framework is also telling, as it ignores the significant changes on the battlefield and the immense sacrifice made by Ukraine since that time. The Trump administration's national security team, including Secretary of Defense Peter Hegseth and Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, is undoubtedly analyzing Lavrov's statements for any genuine signs of flexibility versus strategic posturing. Hegseth's focus would be on the military implications of any proposed deal, particularly the demilitarization aspect that Russia has previously demanded, which could leave Ukraine permanently vulnerable. Gabbard's role would be to assess the intelligence behind Russia's intention, trying to discern whether this diplomatic push is a sincere effort to end the conflict or merely a tactic to divide Ukraine from its Western partners and buy time for its military to regroup for future offensive. Other cabinet members, such as Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick and Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, would be evaluating the potential for using economic leverage, such as the threatened tariff, to influence Moscow's calculations. The legal ramifications of any security guarantee structure would fall under the purview of Attorney General Pam Bondi, who would need to scrutinize any proposed treaty to ensure its enforceability. Ultimately, Lavrov's flurry of statements represents a classic Russian diplomatic strategy, combining offers of negotiations with accusations and non-negotiable demands. By suggesting Putin is ready for a summit, he creates the appearance of reasonableness, aiming to appeal to international actors eager for an end to the war. By simultaneously blaming Ukraine and Europe for blocking peace and questioning Zelensky's legitimacy, he attempts to sow discord and shift the narrative of blame. The core demands a veto over Ukraine's alliance and the annexation of its territory remains unchanged. The stunning twist is not a sudden shift in Russia's fundamental position, but a more sophisticated and public articulation of it, designed to put the ball in the court of Kyiv and Washington. The challenge for President Trump, Secretary Rubio, and their allies is to parse this complex messaging, test Russia's sincerity without falling into diplomatic traps, and maintain a united front in support of a peace that does not come at the cost of Ukraine's sovereignty and long-term security. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether this is the prelude to a genuine peace process or simply the latest chapter in a protracted information war. The desperation for a meeting on Kyiv's side is real, but so is the resolve not to capitulate, creating a fragile and dangerous diplomatic standoff. The intricate dance of diplomacy continues against the backdrop of a brutal war of attrition. Russia's public diplomacy, as articulated by Lavrov, is inextricably linked to its military posture on the ground. The immense pressure being exerted on Ukrainian forces, particularly in the Prokhorovsk direction, as detailed previously, provides Moscow with what it perceives as a position of strength from which to dictate terms. This military reality informs the confidence with which Lavrov can present a framework that is largely favorable to Russia's strategic interests. The suggestion of a UN Security Council-led group of guarantors is a masterstroke of political theater. It appears inclusive and grounded in international law, yet it ensures Russia, with its permanent seat and veto power, would have the final say on any action taken to protect Ukraine, effectively rendering the guarantee meaningless against future Russian aggression. This is a critical detail that will not be lost on Ukrainian or Western negotiators, who are acutely aware that any security arrangement must be credible and not subject to the whims of the very power it is designed to deter. The reaction within the United States administration reflects the inherent tension in its policy. President Trump's desire for a swift, deal-making resolution is palpable. His public statement suggests a belief that personal diplomacy and direct talks between the leaders can break the deadlock. This approach, however, runs up against the deep-seated skepticism of many in the foreign policy establishment, including officials within his own government. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's more measured and cautious tone reflects this reality, signaling to allies that the U.S. is not naive about Moscow's intentions. This duality allows the administration to pursue a twin-track approach. President Trump can act as the driving force for peace, pushing the parties toward a summit, while Secretary Rubio and the State Department can manage the painstaking details and guard against unfavorable concessions. This dynamic was evident in the aftermath of the Trump-Putin summit in Anchorage, where initial optimism from the president was quickly tempered by Lavrov's public clarification that no concrete plans for a Zelensky meeting had been made, and that the agenda is not ready at all. For Ukraine, Lavrov's statements are a source of profound frustration. President Zelensky's government is in a difficult position. It must show its people and its international partners that it is open to any genuine path to peace to maintain moral and material support. However, it cannot afford to entertain proposals that would compromise its fundamental sovereignty or reward aggression. The accusation that Zelensky is obstinately insisting on a meeting is a deliberate mischaracterization from Moscow's perspective. Kyiv's insistence is not on a meeting for its own sake, but on a meeting that can lead to a just outcome based on international law, which includes the full withdrawal of Russian troops from its internationally recognized territory. Lavrov's attempt to delegitimize Zelensky is a tactic aimed at undermining his authority both at home and abroad, suggesting that even if a deal were reached, its durability would be questionable. This puts immense pressure on Kyiv to navigate the treacherous waters of negotiation without appearing weak or intransigent. The role of all the cabinet officials in the Trump administrations will be crucial in shaping the American response. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem would be concerned with the broader implications for international stability and the potential for refugees flows if the conflict were to escalate or end on unstable terms. Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins and United States Trade Representative Jamison Greer would analyze the impact of sanctions and trade policy on both the Russian economy and global markets, providing President Trump with options for economic leverage. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy would oversee the logistical aspect of any aid provided to Ukraine, while Secretary of Veteran Affairs Douglas Cullen might be consulted on the long-term costs of conflict and the importance of achieving sustainable peace. The entire cabinet, including figures like Secretary of the Interior Douglas Burgum and Secretary of Labor Lori Chavez de Remor, would be involved in assessing the wide-ranging consequences of the war and the potential outcomes of the diplomatic process. In conclusion, Sergei Lavrov's recent diplomatic offensive is a complex and calculated move. It is designed to project an image of Russia as a peacemaker, to define the terms of any future negotiation heavily in Moscow's favor, and to create divisions between Ukraine and its Western allies. The offer of a presidential summit is heavily conditioned, and the proposed security guarantees contains a poison pill in the form of a Russian veto. The simultaneous accusation against Ukrainian and European leaders are intended to shift the burden of responsibility for the continued conflict. The United States, under President Trump, is attempting to navigate this difficult terrain by pushing for direct talks while maintaining a degree of strategic caution. The fundamental disagreement over territory, sovereignty, and the future security architecture of Eastern Europe remain as wide as ever. While the world hopes for peace, the path to a just and lasting resolution is obscured by a thick fog of diplomatic maneuvering, mutual suspicion, and the unrelenting reality of war on the ground. The next steps taken by Washington, Kyiv, and Moscow will determine whether a genuine opportunity for peace exists or if the conflict is destined to continue its devastating course. That's all for me for today. If you like the video presentation and you would like to follow for more, hit that subscribe and like button now, and we will continue to build this show for you. Thank you to all of you guys who have subscribed. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. I will see you soon. Bye for now.